title of the presentation is Global Megatrends. But in reality, we should be talking about one and only megatrend that sweeps the rest into dust. So let's get to it. You know, one thing we know for sure is making predictions is difficult. And it's especially difficult if we try to make predictions about the future. So let's start in a year, 80 years from now. Let's start in the year 2098. And you're all in this conversation, so you guys think about you in that specific year. And you're hosting a dinner party. You wanted to invite your friends over. And they're late, and you have about 30 minutes, and you turn on the TV. What do you think is showing on TV in the year 2098? Any thoughts? What are you seeing? Flying cars. Anything else? Robots on TV, yeah. So it's a trick question for 3 reasons. First of all, 80 years from now, there'll be no TVs, and that's a given. I think there's already 0 doubt about that. Most of you in this room don't watch TV, right? You watch your Facebook Live or your YouTube or your Instagram stories, but turning on TV and waiting for, your favorite program to start, barely anybody thinks of that as a reasonable way of spending time. Second reason this is a tricky question is everybody in this room will be over 100 years old. And this is no longer out of the questions. We're speculating about what we'll see on TV, but we're also speculating that we'll live this long. And I'll tell you, in this world where predictions are hard, I think it's more likely than not that everyone in this room will live above 100. And we'll talk about it later. And the third reason why this is a tricky question is whatever it is we're imagining, we're wrong. It's flying cars or robots or anything. We're completely wrong because thinking this far forward in today's context is impossible. It's just the way technology is changing the world is not marginal where it changes from this to that. It just changes it upside down to where the context is so new that we cannot approximate it. Now take this statement with a grain of salt. If we are to look back at, say, 5th century, you think asking that very same question of a person in the 5th century is saying, can you make a forecast for the beginning of the 6th century about how the life will look? What do you think they'll say? Will they be wrong if they said, look, there'll be a majority of population will be toiling the fields and there'll be, just the way of life would not have changed all that greatly between 5th and 6th century, probably between 11th and 12th, the same. But it's no longer the case, because now we're dealing with this technological progress that reshapes the world at a pace that is unprecedented. And so when we talk about megatrends, I feel that that's one and only megatrend that matters. So let's start with an individual experience with this exact idea. And let's talk about my own experience, that way it's more relatable. Who is recognizing this technology? Anybody? It's cutting edge stuff. Come on, no? Is there somebody who has no clue what this is? Do you recognize what this is? Yeah, there you go. It's a communication space, right? I remember going into exactly this kind of booth in the mid-90s to speak to my relatives 100 kilometers away. It was a intercity calling, it was complicated stuff. You go and then you register, you wait, and then eventually you call. And then a few years later, I had my first mobile phone. And think about it, it's like from phone booth at your post office to a mobile phone. And this is present, this is again present. Like, you guys recognize a date as people are having a conversation? Have you been in a situation where you gather with your friends and you are all talking and for 5 minutes nobody pulled out their phone? Has that happened in the last months to anybody? So the present is the communication leapfrogged way above and beyond anything reasonable. This, we think of it as a future. Mr. Zuckerberg is walking along, you know, celebrity, well-known person, a billionaire. Where are people looking? Anybody sees him? No one sees him, but they're all immersed in this virtual reality world. The virtual reality that's we think of as future, but we will embrace this technology just the same as we've embraced electricity and we've embraced mobile phones. By the time we're all wearing those devices to spend our time instead of watching TV or YouTube, it will be seamless. It'll just keep happening this way. It's the technology trends are not something we can halt or stop. So what I wanted to think about is how do we spell the word future just using emoji? You know, emoji is a modern communication. How do we say that not using letters? So this is what I wanted to offer. Oh, if the graphics worked. So what you should see is a little robot on the left. In the middle, it should be a smiley face and a little globe. The reason I have these three emojis there that, again, you cannot see. So technology is not yet taken over our lives, as evidenced by the screen. But the reason I think these are the three pillars to contemplate the future, it's clearly whatever innovations, whatever the new technologies that enter our lives, they are shaping our reality. But then how does it affect me as an individual? And how does it affect us as society, as humanity? All those three angles deserve consideration. So let me kind of run through idea of technology very quickly. How old is this technology? It's the very first one. The very first the humans used. Any guesses? 10 years? Million years? 20 million? It's 1.5 million. For a long time, we thought that stone tools were used by pre-humans about 1.5 million. Let's see. Yeah, I think I'm saying it right. Yep. So that's when we discovered it. Recently, we've found a new archaeological discovery, and now we've adjusted our estimate to 1.8 million. So we were wrong by 300,000 years. Like, think about 300,000 years. We went from a phone booth to a mobile phone in 30 years. So 300,000, 30, right? Like from that technology to today versus from just a error adjustment on our discovery. The next technology was fire. Took about 500,000. Also, estimates vary. But we used to not invent things at the same pace. That's my point. Now, this graph, for me, explains everything. If you think of one thing you remember from this presentation, it's the exponential pace at which technology is growing. If we look back again when we've invented the abacus, right? We've invented the printing press. Printing press changed the world upside down. The information became shareable, which used to not be the case. Electricity, you know, you have your steam engine. Like, a lot of things were just making the world a very new place on the day they were invented. And it used to take a while. It used to take a millennia. Then maybe it took a century to come up with something new. Of course, you know, you have new products coming out, improved products. You have, you know, moving from iPhone 8 to iPhone 10, or like, that's one thing. But groundbreaking innovations are happening at an unprecedented pace. If we imagine things like electricity. If we invent it once a century, society adjusts. If you invent something as big as electricity 3 times a year, like, imagine you start year in the pre-electricity world, then you get so many things happen, and you end the year in the world that you don't recognize. This is where we're heading. One thing about technology is we can't uninvent it. If once we've invented it, it's there, and then there is no stopping or rolling back. If you look here on the stage, you see a cyborg. You don't just see a normal basic human, you see an enhanced human. Do you agree? Do I look enhanced? Yeah, yeah, you see? Now I'm less enhanced. Barely see anything. Now I'm an enhanced human. I got shoes, right? So without the shoes, I'm less enhanced. I'm immersed with technology. I don't have brain implants, but I am immersed with technology. Without technology that I'm using, I'm not as effective, right? So, but once we put something into our brains to interface with computers, it will not be a big leap. We've made a big leap when we started wearing the fur to stay warm. So what you see on the screen is a $1 billion project and also a city that can house 30,000 people. The funny thing about this city is nobody lives there. It's a private investment of $1 billion, no government money. It's just people felt that it's okay to use their own hard-earned cash to create a city in the middle of New Mexico in America. Nobody lives there, nobody plans to live there. It's done just for one purpose, for modern technology, for connected devices to be tested. If you have your driverless car, you take it to the real city environment. If you have your little drones, if you've got your the bell that is connected to your toaster, you can test it in a real kind of human conditions with no humans, so no liability. But it tells you a story, right? We're ready for the world of Internet of Things, and then we're testing it already with private cash, just for the facility. Another fascinating thing that is not yet acknowledged widely. Have you heard of a term, designer babies? Anybody? Designer babies, the term. I'm not talking about meeting designer babies, but hearing about it. It's the idea of editing genes. Like your child, before it's born, is enhanced by tweaking their genes. Let's say they could be susceptible to some terrible disease, and that is edited before they're born. But as soon as you do that, as soon as you allow for this kind of enhancement, maybe you want their intellectual capacity enhanced. Maybe you want their height enhanced. So this is not yet happening. We're not talking about designer babies. It's a big debate on ethics and the technology is not yet there. But what this graph tells you, that even the Moore's law tells you that technology is improving exponentially, computing technology. And this is logarithmic scale, so it looks linear. But the sequencing of genome is going even faster. The cost of sequencing a genome outpacing the Moore's law. And then the amount of genome sequenced is also going exponential, a double exponential function. So what that tells you is once we've sequenced so many more genomes and we've applied machine learning to it, we will discover things that are beyond comprehension. And the implications of those things are, again, impossible. Like, we cannot say what that means now. We can predict, speculate, but we'll be wrong. 90% of our thinking will be off. Now, with new technology comes new dilemmas. This is a real eagle in real Netherlands where I live, hunting a real drone. This is a government program to protect the airspace. Schiphol is #4 airport in Europe, and it's the eagles are there to hunt the drones so they don't disrupt the traffic. There's a wallet. I got this wallet in my pocket. It's made out of metal. And it's done so we protect our credit cards from wireless theft. Somebody tapping your credit card in your pocket on the metro or on the bus, and then suddenly 20 euro disappears from your account. You don't even know what's happening. No one went into your pocket, but the money is gone. So now we have the secret wallet to protect you. This tells you how technology might disrupt the idea of work. If the driverless cars is not a science fiction anymore. It's almost inevitability. We will have driverless cars. We already have cashless stores. And then on the first screen is what New York airport looks like if you show up with an American passport. You tap it, the machine scans you, and the person who used to check my passport when I flew in no longer has a job. So think of just these three things. They can remove, I don't know, 5 million people from a labor market in America alone. And what happens? Because those things, when they happen, you know, they displace employment. And then there's already today's technology can take care of 50% of work that we're paid to do. Today's technology, not future technology. It's a McKinsey study tells you that. The work that we perform and we get paid to do could be done by machines, half of it. Then another risk to consider is the unelected companies running our lives. You know, it's not my image, but it's very telling. You have 4 businesses, a couple of them already reached $1 trillion threshold, and they have so much power. And you take the Facebook struggles with the Cambridge Analytica, like those things are pretty intense and meaningful, and those companies are businesses, and then yet they influence our lives. The celebrities on the screen, anybody recognizes a celebrity? Anyone? Familiar faces? Okay, well, we'll not keep the suspense going too long. None of those people ever lived. What you're looking at, not real people. It's just pixels assembled on the screen. It's not a photo. Like gentlemen here taking photos of actual people, but then those never existed. The algorithm was taught to create images from nothing. So think of implications of that, and maybe you'll cover this a bit more. Then we have positive stuff. And the video calling is now a mundane thing. You don't think the video calling is strange. You just click a button and here you are. This car claims to get better over time. You usually buy a car, it gets cheaper, it breaks down. This car, you buy it today, tomorrow it saves your life because it got an update and now it can pay attention to whatever. You fall asleep and then it pulls over. There is this technology, I think, is totally amazing. It's probably not working, not yet. But think of you traveling. You want to go to, I don't know, rural China, or you want to go to Tanzania and then spend time with indigenous people. It used to be impossible. The language barrier would be so hard. This tells us that language will disappear as a barrier altogether. We could converse. I can converse to a person whose language I don't understand without ever missing a bit. That's going to be normal. I live in the Netherlands, I don't speak Dutch. I get letters sent to me by Dutch government. I take my phone, I scan it, and it tells me what it is in English. And I already live with this technology, I don't question it, it just makes my life easier. Now language will disappear as a barrier. Think of what that means for societal implications. Let's talk about individual impact. This should have highlighted a smiley face that talking about us as individuals. One tricky thing is technology is going faster in terms of advancement than any of us. We're slightly better than businesses, and governments are way behind. The jobs we talked about, in so few years, in less than 10 years, most people will not expect to have full-time work. We'll all become freelancers, and that's for America. Some countries are experimenting with basic income. Have you heard of basic income? Idea of basic income? When you get a chunk of money simply sent to you for a living. So you live here in Kazakhstan, the government of Kazakhstan sends you some money and say, that's your money, do as you wish. And it's understood to be a better policy than anything else, because if we're displaced by machines from work, then giving us some money to live is a good idea. This gentleman, if you're not reading his books, you should consider Yuval Harari, and what he talks about is we're already trying to resolve problems that were unfathomable. Like, we were not ever aiming at immortality. We were not planning to play God or have endless happiness. But now those are the new frontiers of humanity. This is a less rosy picture. When you think of technological advancement, you have to think of the downside. This futurist, Werner Winch, says that when we look back, as technology progresses, we integrate with it, and we look back at us as we are today, we'll look like goldfish. We will just be so primitive. So to the future humans, we're very primitive, so brace yourselves. Now, Nick Bostrom, I think, is very, how will I put it? He has given it a lot of thought. He's written a book called Superintelligence, and talks about the idea of us getting to the point where AI matches human intellectual ability. And as soon as that happens, then AI is infinitely smarter than we are. And then the likelihood is it'll destroy us all, according to this guy. My favorite topic, my background is in diplomacy. So the reason I want to give this presentation is really the last part. I want to look at societal implications, and I'll talk about another mega trend that is also interesting and deserves our attention. You know, what unites these two pictures? It's, yeah? Yeah, they're both holding paper, that's good. It's President of China, Xi Jinping, picking up the mantle of globalization, opening his address at the World Economic Forum, where he's never been, no leader of China been to World Economic Forum until he went a couple of years ago. And he started his presentation quoting Charles Dickens, saying that it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And this is what this fourth industrial revolution is. It's very complex period of this immense transition that it's hard to qualify. Are we going towards, you know, excellent, amazing future, or are we going to a dystopia where humans are redundant? But what it tells us also, it talks about Asia century. It's also interesting in Kazakhstan, where you are in Asia, you're bordering on China, and there is a big mega trend that we are considering in this country, and it should be. There are many ways to look at it. There are some publications speculate that the multipolar world is emerging. There is a way to look at the map if you think of population rather than the territory, which is probably a more clever way to look at it. This, to me, is revealing. If you look at the beginning of time since we're counting it from for our modern calendar, there was no American economy. There was no even European economy. It was China and India. Economy existed in Asia. There were no other economies that were meaningful. And then suddenly, if you look at 1980, there's barely Asia in it, right? And now you look at present, and its equilibrium is re-emerging. So when we think of Asian century, I think this is an image that gives you a sense of where we are. On the other hand, if we go back to my original thesis that technology is what drives the world, it's one and only mega trend that matters. If you think of geopolitics, if you think of statecraft, my view is Silicon Valley has a bigger long-term impact on everything without ever, you know, signing up for it, right? They're simply sitting there inventing ideas, whatever, creating technologies, but the impact is so far-reaching and incomprehensible, but it matters, and then that's what we should acknowledge. One other quick point to make is my view is the state of, the power of a nation state over time is declining versus everybody else, versus a corporation, versus an individual, versus a city. But our global architecture is built on nation states. United Nations is an organization that brings states together. But then you have, like I say, an individual with a message on a YouTube channel has increasing power. You have mega cities with more influence on the world affairs. So you have the corporations that I mentioned that are, capitalization of those businesses is bigger than most countries' GDP. One thing to remember is the genesis story of our global system. The problem I have with it, the problem with United Nations and Bretton Woods institutions, is not only how they're run, it's just where they come from. They come from as a opposition. They come as an opposition to conflict. The UN was established as a way to prevent war. We did not establish a single institution to build global community as an aspirational vision. We're witnessing today the backlash, the kind of nationalist movements re-emerging. But it seems that the trajectory is pointing towards globalized community. It seems almost inevitable to me is just how else can we address climate change? How else can we address the idea of competition, who invents AI faster, if it's competition between countries? If we have not organized ourselves as a global community, we are doomed. Again, my personal view, if we're not, our global institutions are not prepared to deal with global challenges, we will really struggle. And the reason the institutions that exist today are struggling to cope is they were built in the opposition to conflict as their main mandate. They weren't built with a vision towards the common future for humanity as one humanity. And most people may not even welcome this message. Do we want to live in one humanity, or do we want to live in the Netherlands, Kazakhstan, European Union? I don't know, but in my view, this matters, and that's where we should be going. This image is very useful, I find. You know, if you look at European member states and wars among them, war used to be a default. Peace used to be an interruption between war. It wasn't the other way around. It's not like we had peace, and suddenly war, and then it stops, and then back to peace. It was completely the opposite. But now, the modern phenomena is the conflict is actually reducing. Our global system needs to be proactive. We cannot be a rejectionist system, saying we stand against certain things. We need to stand for something. And that's my main message. Since the emojis don't work, we'll get to the robot. But we'll answer questions together, maybe with Conrad at the end.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Andrew. Yeah.